Hello everyone. Today we're descending into absolute darkness to examine one of the most terrifying tragedies in the history of caving. The horrific incident in Peak Cavern, where 20-year-old Oxford student Neil Moss became wedged immovably in a stone vise with no way to move even a millimeter. This is a story soaked in desperate heroism, insane drama, and the merciless grip of the underworld. A tragedy that triggered one of the largest rescue operations in British history. So hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's begin our descent into the abyss. As always, we start from afar. The protagonist of this nightmare was 20-year-old Oscar Hackett Neil Moss. His father, Eric Moss, owned a cotton mill in Manchester and was a very wealthy man. As befitted a gentleman of his standing, he sent his son to Oxford to study philosophy. Neil was a lean young man, almost 190 centimeters tall, an active athlete who burned with passion for exploration. The depths of the earth called to him more than anything else, so he joined the British Speleological Association. Sounds impressive, but in reality, the group he was part of was just a handful of university students with almost no real experience. More of an adventure club than a professional organization. Sunday, the 22nd of March, 1959, 8 young cavers gather for an expedition to the famous Peak Cavern in the village of Castleton, Derbyshire, England. The cave was well known. Its main entrance was only 150 meters from the village high street. It was the local backyard cave that kids and tourists visited all the time, but almost no one ever went beyond the show cave sections. This group, however, planned to go deep, about 300 meters underground, into little explored territory. Their target, a narrow vertical fissure discovered just 2 weeks earlier. The first passage is called Dirty Ducks. You crawl single file through thick, clinging mud. In the rain, it turns into a slimy swamp. After that comes Boulder's Passage, a relatively easy 150-meter stretch. Next, a 3-meter climb into the upper series. Then the Needle's Eye Passage, bristling with stalactites, but still passable. It ends at a shaft in the ceiling. You climb up and suddenly find yourself waist-deep in liquid clay. Wading through freezing sludge, you finally emerge into what is probably the most beautiful chamber in the entire cave, the Stalagmite Hall. Today, it is known as Moss Chamber. A vast cathedral space where you can actually stretch and rest, filled with breathtaking stalagmites. They had been underground for over an hour and were roughly 300 meters deep. No need to go further. Their goal was right here, in the floor of this chamber. A narrow, spiraling vertical fissure disappearing into the unknown. Discovered only a fortnight earlier. No one had ever descended it. The first person to do so would become a true pioneer. The team later recalled, "We knew the shaft twisted like a corkscrew and would be brutal. We estimated about 12 meters deep, but lowered a 22-meter rope ladder just in case." The passage looked doable for someone 170 centimeters tall. Only Neil Moss was nearly 190 centimeters, yet he was burning to be first, and nothing could stop him. The shaft turned out to be pure hell, a tightening spiral demanding inhuman flexibility, with sections only 45 centimeters wide. Neil pushed the ladder ahead of him, contorted his body, and kept shouting up to his friends, "Everything's fine." No safety rope, it would have snagged. The only backup was the ladder itself. Despite the demonic twists, Neil proved astonishingly flexible and got almost all the way. Until he hit a huge boulder blocking the way. He tried to shift it, but there was no room to maneuver. Decision made, climb back up. And that's when the real horror began. On the way down, the walls had held him. He barely used the ladder. On the way up, the next rung was too low. He couldn't bend his knees. He started wriggling upward and jammed solid, shoulders locked. He jerked harder, wedged even tighter. Tried to slide back down and reposition. The rock refused to let go. He was trapped by the shoulders, unable to move a single millimeter in any direction. Panic, screams for help. His friends grabbed the rope ladder and hauled. Neil rose about 40 centimeters. Then the metal rungs jammed like wedges in the fissure walls. Game over. Legs couldn't reach the lower rung. Arms pinned to his sides, zero leverage. Desperate cries echoed from the bottom. Such accidents, though rare, do happen in caving. The logical next step: lower someone, loop a strong rope around Neil, and yank him out like a cork. One friend descended and tied the rope. The thin lines snapped instantly. Second attempt, the bend sawed the rope against sharp edges. It broke again. Chunks rained down onto Neil's face. His screams grew louder and more insane. Every snapped rope drove him into deeper despair. He thrashed with the last of his strength, only driving himself tighter into the stone trap. Knees wouldn't bend, elbows wouldn't move, total immobilization. Only now did his friends realize how grave the situation was. Some sprinted to the surface to raise the alarm. Neil became stuck around 15:30. Within hours, hundreds of volunteers from all over England, police, the Royal Air Force, and even the Navy were converging on the cave. The entrance was practically in the village, access was easy. But the real killer crept in unnoticed. Carbon dioxide was building up in the shaft, oxygen running out. Neil began acting strangely. His friend George Cooper later recalled. He became quiet, as if he no longer understood how bad it was. He even suggested we leave him and go have tea. His speech grew faint and incoherent. He was delirious. Experienced cavers tried one after another. 3 lost consciousness from CO and were hauled out half dead. The 4th was Ron Peters. Risking becoming stuck himself and choking on poison gas, he somehow reached Neil and looped a new rope around his chest. They pulled from above. Peters heard Neil groan, then wheeze. The rope was crushing his ribcage, making breathing even harder. Peters later told the press, "The guy was twisted in a corkscrew. The only way was to completely rotate his body. I barely managed to grab his back with my teeth. That was all I could reach." They lifted him, another 45 centimeters, and stopped. The upper chamber was now critical with gas too. Rescuers staggered out delirious, eyes blood red, gasping like madmen. Ron Peters was taken to hospital with severe CO poisoning and exhaustion. Everyone understood. In a couple of hours there would be no one left to save. That night the RAF delivered oxygen cylinders. Cavers rigged them at the fissure mouth and pumped air through hoses all night. It helped a little, but nowhere near enough. Experts topside concluded they needed an extraordinarily small person to squeeze close enough to free Neil. The next morning June Bailey arrived, a tiny typist from Manchester and passionate caver in her spare time. She crawled farther than anyone else, assessed the situation, and came back with a horrifying verdict. The only chance is to break both his collarbones so the shoulders can collapse inward. Everyone agreed to the insane plan. But no one could descend again. The gas knocked people out instantly. Almost 24 hours after the nightmare began, gurgling breathing could still be heard at the shaft entrance. 18-year-old rescuer Ron Freer told reporters, "The air is murderous, head-splitting. We were allowed only 10 minutes. I was 3 meters from him. The breathing was perfectly clear. By this point Neil could no longer eat or even keep an oxygen mask on." One rescuer said, "He's still mumbling something, but we can't understand a word." A doctor who spent 9 hours underground emerged and declared, "Now only a miracle can save him. His breathing is getting weaker and weaker." They brought compressed air cylinders to try to displace the CO. The crowd had wrecked the cave's microclimate. Everything became hot and humid. Walls, ladders, ropes, all coated in mud. All that was visible in the shaft was a mud collapse, and somewhere inside it, Neil Moss. They hammered with crowbars, even started digging a parallel tunnel. The rock wouldn't yield, and heavy machinery couldn't be brought in. Then rain started outside. Dirty ducts flooded completely. They feared a flash flood and halted work to avoid more deaths. As soon as the rain eased, a doctor from the RAF and the last team went down one final time. Silence, absolute silence. On the 24th of March 1959, Neil Moss was declared dead. Dr. Hewitt said it was the only time in his career he had pronounced death without ever seeing the patient. Neil's father, Eric Moss, had waited at the entrance the entire time. When the news came, he forbade any attempt to recover the body. One victim is enough. Rescuers gathered stones from the cave floor and permanently sealed the fissure mouth. It became his tomb. The stalagmite hall was renamed Moss Chamber. Neil's mother later told the press her son had never been an experienced caver. Ron Peters received the George Medal. Les Selman, John Thompson, and RAF Lieutenant John Carter received the British Empire Medal. Yet criticism poured in: poor organization, incompetence, youthful recklessness. Some newspapers demanded caving be banned entirely. The tragedy changed cave rescue protocols forever. Neil Moss's story dominated front pages across Britain and beyond. In 2004, it inspired the novel One Last Breath. His body still lies there, deep inside Peak Cavern, where cavers occasionally pass to this day. Tell me everything you think about this story in the comments. I genuinely love reading them. Smash that like button if your heart clenched. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I know a lot of you watch without subscribing. Please fix that. It means the world to me. Share with friends. Your support is one of the few things keeping this channel alive. See you at the next summit or the next abyss.